Thank you for coming on this very cold January afternoon. Essentially, the premise today is about discussing, well, one of the themes I think of regulation, particularly when it comes to tech, is a sort of asymmetry between digital businesses and their not so digital counterparts. And I think that theme kind of runs through sectors, whether it's e-commerce or or the gig economy. And so we're going to discuss different aspects of that, as it is extremely relevant to the future of work in this sector. And so, starting with the first question, essentially, I'll give you a breakdown of how we're going to do it. I'm going to put out a question for my panelists, and then each of them, whoever has something to say about it, will talk, and then we'll go through rounds, and then I'll open it up to the audience after that. So, within that context of this kind of asymmetry of regulation, states are taking cesses from gig businesses with the understanding that they will put it towards worker welfare. And on that context, the interesting thing is, of course, that there are tons of other contractual workers or temporary workers within the Indian labor force for whom such allowances are not created or for whom such funds are not created. So, one, is there anything that distinguishes gig work from other contractual work? And why are gig work businesses singled out? And whoever wants to take it first can take a shot at it.
Maybe I'll go first. Am I audible? Hello?
You'll have to just switch it on.
Hello? Yeah. So, first of all, thank you everyone for having me here. I'm really happy to be here with this panelist. So, starting with, there shouldn't be any differentiation. Everyone has to be treated in par. The reason why a social security or some of these welfare benefits should be extended to gig workers, ideally should be extended to everyone. Maybe people started focusing on gig workers given its popularity, although the other contractual workers been there for ages. It's not something new. Uh, I believe the contractual workers are typically work with factories or small firms and etc. And they are fragmented and smaller in size. So maybe government wants to start with something where there is large employment or an entrepreneurial opportunities given by these platforms at a digital level to start with and explore and see how things works and then maybe extend to others. So it's just a matter of time for the government to extend as such.
So, in my opinion, what you see, the kind of narratives that we hear about gig workers in India are very similar to the ones that is discussed in the developed world. So, I think to understand the reason why they are in the focus, we should understand the difference in the labor market in the developing countries vis-a-vis the developed ones. So, say you would find upwards of 85% of formal workforce in the developed world. For them, the gig work is a relatively new phenomena. Uh, their perspective is that it is a relative informalization. Uh, and that's why we see the arguments like work classification, thinking about whether gig workers should be considered as employee or not. And then we see how it turned out, where it has origined. Say this started with the riders law in Spain. Then European Union started discussing it, and in recently, I think late last year, they came up with the platform directive, with the same argument of having employment presumption, unless aggregators or platforms, challenges it. But to what end? The question, some, I think Article 2 or 3 of that platform directive says while there is a presumption, the applicability of it is not there for the social security. So the question is, to what end? And that question comes back to the Indian context or the developing countries. Does worker classification is important for social security? The answer is seemingly no. One, what is important is institutionalization of gig workers. That is done by Code on Social Security in 2020 by including them through as a part of the Social Security. Now it will be implemented there sooner or later, but there you go. You have an institutional structure to provide Social Security with a contribution defined in that Code on Social Security, Section 114. And hence, you know, whether they are, the work classification argument doesn't fit in. Similarly, we see California's judgment more recently. It has stepped in the other direction, contrary to the previous judgment. So we see the changes happening, and it's because the people are getting more aware about how it works, because one person working with multiple platforms defines gig work and has its essential characteristic, which is flexibility. In this kind of setup, having an employer-employee relationship is difficult, and Code on Social Security appropriately defines it.
Just to add to that, and understanding why the entire benefits for gig workers is becoming like a more prominent conversation is also because most of these platforms are ubiquitous to our life, right? We use these platforms on a daily basis. We are having interactions with these gig workers on a daily basis. The gig workers are more aware of their rights. So it is important that there is some sort of a contribution model that is set up by the government. But the question will always remain that why only gig platforms have to contribute, or why is there is benefits around gig workers and not for the other traditional contract laborers, right? So it's also because when we have these same conversations with the government also says that you are more accessible for us to catch hold of because we are a digitized platforms, right? So it's very easy for them to reach out to us and say that, hey, you need to provide these benefits. And it's much more tougher for them to go to the traditional organizations or companies and make these kind of enforcements there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Telcos have also been the kind of victims of this attitude when it came to collecting revenue, because they were the first kind of large industry that was heavily formalized and easily accessible for revenue generation for the government, and that has essentially eviscerated telecom industries across the world. And it was actually an ITU recommendation. And yeah, I absolutely agree with you on the EU front. There is no real rationale for any of the regulations that they come out with. They regulate first and think later. That's what it seems like.
Maybe I just
yeah,
want to add
yeah,
one more point. So, see, ultimately, government has to understand how we also think. I'll give an example. Say, when you look at the definition of a gig worker, typically looked upon as someone part-time, someone who has a flexibility, someone looking for some additional income and etc. This is generally the way the gig economy is generally looked upon. But today, it is more and more coming out as an full-time employment. If I take in our example, we believe it's not just a bike taxi captain alone as a gig worker, but even a full-time three-wheeler or an auto rickshaw driver, or a four-wheeler cab driver. Now, they have been in the business, they have been doing their entrepreneurial journey, but they were not getting the relevant social security or the welfare benefits as such. And to us, they are also part of the gig economy. And now it is our responsibility to educate the government that they should also be brought into the scheme. So the definition, everything we need to put across, and I think we all are working towards that. So something like that should be extended to the other partners or other contractual people who should also be brought into the aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's tiers of aggregation, right? And I think that gets missed, that basically there's people with entire fleets of vehicles who have been running taxi companies and are also then just leveraging technology to add to their income streams. And of course, all of this gets lost because there's no space for nuance in policymaking, unfortunately, or tends to not be. Ayush, coming to you, you know, how does gig work kind of intersect with sustainability? Where do you see the touch points there?
I'm audible? Yeah. Foremost, thank you for having me here. It's an amazing August company I have with me on the panel today. So I'm going to address the business sustainability part of it, of your question. I think as an ecosystem, there are multiple things that aggregators need to consider, given that gig work in its essence is an individual is out and about on the road every day, and he's meeting multiple people which the platform has no form of agency over. So on that front, I'm actually very pleased to inform you folks that Zomato has done multiple initiatives to be at the forefront of this, and many industry-first initiatives rather. We have voluntarily, we have made a commitment that 100% of our deliveries will be by electric vehicles by 2030. And that was not a mandate that someone put on us. We did it as a responsibility towards the ecosystem that thrives on the basis of lakhs of delivery partners on the road today. Similarly, we have plastic-free packaging commitments that we have made. And at the same time, we have also made commitments on reducing food wastage. We have a dedicated vertical within the company called Feeding India, which looks after this, looks after giving back to the society as a whole. So that being said, I think sustainability should be the forefront for this, should be the forefront for every aggregator that there is. And at the same time, the government should have some form of appreciation towards platforms who are engaging in such activities, and purely out of their own volition and no mandates. Thank you.
Absolutely, I agree with you completely. In fact, the interesting thing here is that many big five-star hotels have absolutely no programs to take care of their food waste, including the Oberoi. We in fact asked them once, and we said that we gave the name of Feeding India. In fact, we said that this initiative is there. But they said, oh no, there's a danger of us being sued. But really, I don't know. That can easily be waived. I think it's an excuse and someone doesn't want to do the paperwork. But please go ahead, Vivek.
Ayush started with something from the business front. Maybe I wanted to add up from the gig worker point of view. One of the things a basic sustainability people expect is the earnings, a fair earnings to be available. I think everyone in this place is working towards that. A digital platform or an aggregator, one of the things, the way it started is people used to control the prices, people used to control the cash flows and etc. And today everyone is learning that why should we control aspect of it. There are industries shifting towards where let go of those controls. Let's say Rapido, or there are a few other mobility firms, including Ola and etc., who have shifted to this concept of let the price be determined by either the driver partner or the passenger. Why should we get involved in this? And slow and steadily, everyone is moving towards that direction. This helps them to decide what kind of earnings they want to make and whether it is sustainable. And same story goes with the passenger. What kind of earnings I wanted to apply to it. So this also assists the government in the long run to determine the fair wages for these people, and the platforms are responsibly making towards that. So some of these models on the new age models, where these controls being given back to them, I think these should be encouraged, and more of these should come into the picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the world over, you see subsidies for green transitions, right? And that's a very important component of that transitioning and countries meeting their goals. And I think that the more the government is kind of not aware of it, but the more alert they are to the necessity of that, I think, and the quicker they kind of get to action on it, the better.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So now when it comes to sustainability, for example, there are also states who have come up with regulations which has EV mandates for platforms, right? So for example, Delhi basically has this scheme called Aggregator and Delivery Service Provider Scheme, where they're saying that every platform should have, the delivery service platform should have 10% EV vehicles. That's for two-wheelers and 5% for four-wheeler trucks or four-wheelers. Now, we've been having this conversation with the government about relooking at the mandate, primarily because there is absence of vehicle in those categories. Like, for example, a logistics company like us, which is distance agnostic, like we will deliver anything from Khan Market or Gurgaon, right? So you don't have two-wheeler bikes which has that kind of range. So when one side, when government is looking to have these mandates, which are great, they're not sensitized about the different business models and the availability of these kind of vehicles. That's number one. Number two, when we are pushing our driver partners or any gig worker to move to a EV vehicle, what we don't understand is that they don't have that kind of money to buy a new EV vehicle. Now the EV market is not matured enough to have a used vehicle either. So usually what a gig worker who's basically doing a gig on a two-wheeler does is that they, instead of buying a new bike, they actually buy a used bike. But you don't have a used two-wheeler EV in the market for them to have access to. So while platforms are putting all their efforts to try and hit this mandate on best effort basis, the fact that government is still, after having multiple conversations, unable to understand that there is a practicality in implementation is where the gap also lies. So while platforms are pushing for sustainability and government is pushing platform for sustainability, there isn't a co-created solution on how effectively we can do this on ground.
And also, if they're buying used vehicles, there's a recycling effect, right? That is a sustainable practice as well, which is kind of being disregarded. Absolutely. Like I said, practical realities on the ground tend to be ignored when policies are made. Now, I mean, since we've spoken a lot about the workforce, a recent report indicated that 39% of job skills will be outdated by 2030. And presumably, I mean, a lot of this is on the back of automation. Now, with the gig economy particularly, I see that automation being a ways away because, a lot of it relate to autonomous vehicles, which are quite a ways away of like being on the ground. But at the same time, do you see it coming in other aspects? Do you see this trend affecting you? And how do you see basically the gig economy in the context of this kind of automation and job creation?
So, I mean, a lot of algorithmic management is already there, and it is for good. What essentially location-based platform economy does is matching the demand and supply through algorithms, and whereas determining the payments as well as the matching to the nearest and the best possible worker. So some kind of algorithmic, but it may not necessarily be for bad. What we see with platform economy is that it is for good because it ultimately we see it expands. At OMI Foundation, we had done one policy brief for G20 Brazil, particularly mentioning this, that it may lead to the efficient allocation of work, whereas you may find auto drivers may be waiting for rides for a longer time, whereas in platform work, people can continue working irrespective of your location. So second point is related to the earnings, how it pans out. Again, OMI Foundation done the comparison with the cab drivers across 10, 12 cities, I think, pre-COVID, comparing the taxi drivers that are off the platform and the taxi drivers on the platform. The earning difference was as much as 20% at hourly basis. So it may not be necessarily that the automation or the management through algorithm may necessarily leads to some worse outcome.
Hello. See, if you look at going back 30 years or 40 years when computer was invented and etc., people had the same worry. Hey, will it kill the jobs and etc. Things have changed. Like I'm an accountant. The way accountant used to work before and digital era or today how it is. Things have changed. People have adapted to it. So yes, some skill set might go off, but it get replaced with a new skill set, and that is how the age after age things have been going on. There are responsibilities for the platforms as such where we should make sure people are trained, people are educated about the new skill set and how we make them relevant in the whole ecosystem as such. So that responsibility still stays with the platform as such. Maybe statistically, some of these numbers may be right. That I think it's about 35% or 40%. It's been talked about. Don't believe in that number fully, but yes, there'll be some impact, but things will improve. Everyone is innovating. The way Zomato guys are innovating and what Porter is innovating or us innovating has been phenomenal. So people will see new opportunities coming into the picture, new skill set. It's just that we need to educate, we need to bring them into that ecosystem. That's how I believe it.
Just to comment on that, see, for a lot of folks, gig work in its essence is something to have supplemental income during periods of shock. And I'm going to give a statistic here. There was a study conducted by the National Council of Applied Economics and Research in 2023, specific to the food delivery ecosystem, which said that for 24% folks, it was the first formal income avenue. And out of that 24%, 88% were students. So we have kids in the age of 19 to 21, 18 to 21. For them, this is something that they are getting supplemental income from. And at the same time, it's very imperative to understand that gig work, specific to food delivery and quick commerce, is a very low capital investment from the point of a skill set point of view. All you need to do is have a valid driving license and a mobile phone, and that's it, and you're sorted. However, we at Zomato believe that people should not be limited to the strata of gig work permanently. We have had multiple initiatives on this front. In fact, as early as, I believe, last year, there were we did a sort of a feedback survey from delivery partners across the country, out of which we selected 4 of them to become product managers at Zomato. And they contributed to the product as a whole. They worked with us in our headquarters. They're still there. And they are contributing on making the entire ecosystem more sustainable from a gig work point of view. And at the same time, they have upskilled themselves to a great extent. So I feel that when it comes to gig work as a skill, I don't see it fading anytime soon, definitely not by 2039. And it's evolving, it's a nascent industry, and it's going to continue evolving, and it's going to continue having a boom. Thank you.
Also to add to that, so 10 years back when a ride-hailing platform entered India, it was basically like a disruptive technology, right? People were like, oh my God, what will the incumbent taxi drivers do? But the people who started joining these platforms are people who were doing some other forms of work, but they realized that they understood and appreciated the flexibility of these platforms. They joined these platforms, understood the technology, understood how to navigate the app and everything, and then they went ahead, right? And then slowly the incumbent taxi drivers also joined suit. While initially there would have been hesitation about adopting this technology, understanding how an Uber or Ola works, because they realized that there is probably a better chances of earning a higher income, they learned the technology and they moved forward. So as the technology space evolves, people are also learning and upskilling themselves. Now, for example, when it comes to Porter, we also have the truck drivers, right, who are a very different, have very different persona versus the taxi drivers or the two-wheeler drivers. So they are traditional truck drivers who were actually truck drivers even before Porter entered the market. They just joined our platform because they thought, okay, here there is this lead generation, right? They know where the demand is. So initially we were worried, will they adapt to technology and understand the app usage better? But they were very quick to learn. So there is also a lot of investment from the platform side to make the gig workers or teach them about how to navigate these technologies. For example, recently platforms like Zomato have partnered with a National Stock Exchange to have financial literacy for their gig workers. These are all ways through which the gig workers will also learn and upskill, right? So even if one person in a family is financially literate on how to use money, that will impact the entire family. And another thing is that I think there should be more efforts from platform side as well as from government where there is collaboration to have partnerships with the National Skill Development Corporation or any such initiatives where we can upskill our gig workers so that, do we want a two-wheeler delivery person to be a two-wheeler delivery person forever? If for them to move ahead, what are the skills that they would be interested to develop, and how can platforms and government partner to ensure that these skills are imparted is something that we're all working on, and we will get there very soon.
My mind, I was going to follow up with whether the government is supporting any kind of skilling on this front.
Hello? Hello? See, if you look at metro, today we have driverless metro, but that doesn't mean the job of a driver has gone away. He has been given better responsibilities, and that is how upskilling the government itself has been taken up. The same story goes with us. So, like what Athira mentioned on the upskilling, working with the government and etc. Yes, everyone has that responsibility. We just have to focus on those. It'll ease out some operations, ease out some responsibilities, but will be given up replace, and effectively it will be in somewhere there'll be an evolution or somewhere of empowerment to these folks, and that is how I look at it. This.
Do you want to come in?
I have mentioned my submission already. Just to add further on the government. Just to add on the government bit. So I mean, whenever we see whatever the social security or in general the schemes are made, targets the poorest in the society, but some of it becomes unintentionally exclusionary. Say, an example of Ayushman Bharat that takes the data from census of 2011. That census excluded the two-wheeler ownership out of the criteria of the poor. Now, any vehicle ownership, not just two-wheeler. So that would lead to lack of access to Ayushman Bharat for any platform workers, for that matter. So that kind of mindset from the government needs to be changed, in the sense like the owning an asset is not necessarily make you a rich, or even and you do not need to exclude somebody who is transitioning towards the middle class. Say, one thing that platform economy has done is the monetization of the assets. So when people who are owning vehicles, I mean, it's not just the ownership. Many vehicles are being leased out as well. People own a fleet of it. So that monetization of assets has been there. For a person who is owning a car or a two-wheeler makes it more easy to enter in the job market. Now compare it with the informal work. A driver, if he or she takes a leave to go back to his or her village, would there be a guarantee that he can come back and join the same person? No, because the entry is difficult. The entry barrier is low here, and that these are the different aspects that has to be recognized to move for the government to move ahead in this direction, to make them upskill and give them benefit.
On a light note, since you mentioned poverty line, I don't know if anyone's aware of the Parsi poverty line, which is an actual thing, and it's 3 lakhs a month. So I think the government the government needs to be alive to the fact that there are things like inflation, and as the country advances or as relative incomes increase, that these factors should be worked in. So again, I mean, like, we keep kind of belaboring the point of labor, but that this discussion is about the future of work. When it comes to labor, India is a lot like the EU, right? In the sense that there are several states that can implement central legislation on a state subject differently, which is labor. And in the context of the labor codes brought in by the center, what do you feel are important factors for different states to consider regarding gig workers engaged in your separate businesses? And I mean, like, if you have illustrations, or like you gave the illustration of Delhi, where like these, kind of practical nuances are just not being considered.
So I think the code on social security is a good step. It says that the government should implement it as soon as possible. The rise of state legislations, in my opinion, should be seen as an outcome of not implementing for a long time. It's just that state governments tried to fill this policy gap themselves. But what should be the ideal situation is that there should be, unlike EU, here the central government should implement and states should follow. The reason being the portability of social security. If you guys can recall what happened to food security during the COVID, because a lot of migrant workers were around and food security was tied to a particular state of residence, they were unable to get access to their ration cards benefit. Um, with the implementation by the central government, whatever social security schemes will be formed will address this, should address this issue, and it is very likely that that approach will possibly address the portability that because migrant workers discussion doesn't come very often with the gig economy, whereas it is the reality that a lot of workers are migrant, and one of the ways that benefit could reach them practically is only through the central government efforts, and states should follow it.
Just to add to that, foremost, it's important that we have an overview of what state legislations are in this domain right now. Rajasthan enacted back in 2021, if I'm not wrong. And recently we have had the drafts of Karnataka and Jharkhand. It's still in the draft stage. A recurring theme with all of these three legislations is that they have provisions that are contradictory to the Code on Social Security. For example, the definitions in each of these three legislations by the states, the definition differs with what the Code on Social Security has mentioned. The welfare fee mechanism differs from what the Code on Social Security has mentioned. And a very common theme here is that when it comes to state level legislations, they have laid out a mechanism that, okay, platforms are going to contribute such and so and so. What they have not mentioned is how will that corpus be used? What schemes are you giving to gig workers in your states? And in all of this landscape, it's adding nothing but duplicity of compliance and duality of contribution. So now what's happened is that as per states, platforms need to contribute to the state as well as to the central government. So that is adding to a lot of confusion as to where things stand. The ultimate need of the hour is that states should work in synergy with the Ministry of Labor and Employment, have some form of uniformity so as to not impact things like they are right now, with the end objective of gig worker welfare, which is something that we're absolutely aligned on. We have made initiatives, we have informed the governments that these are the initiatives. Have the governments made any initiatives on that front? I'm not too sure of that. But at this point, the ultimate need of the hour, just to reiterate, is that states need to work in synergy with the union government and come out with something as can be considered a benchmark at the global stage. Thank you.
And also just giving context for the uninitiated. So basically, labor is a concurrent subject where both center and state can make laws, right? So in 2020, the central government, Ministry of Labor and Employment, came up with Code on Social Security, which is a global first where they've defined what a gig worker is, which is outside the employer-employer relationship. So as part of that, they've said that they will create a social security fund to which all platforms should be contributing. And this social security fund will be used to provide benefits for the gig workers, ranging from health insurance, accident, life, old age benefits, maternity benefits, and n number of benefits, right? So all platforms welcomed this because this was a great first step, like what I mentioned. But the question is, it's been more than 4 years and nothing has come out of it. So what is the question is then, you have a good law in paper, but if it's not implemented, then what is the point of that good policy? And in the vacuum of this not being implemented is when the states have come up with their own particular draft laws, or Rajasthan, where you have a law passed, which is now in cold storage because the government has changed. So states are coming up with their own draft laws, which are very different from the central law in terms of contribution formula and everything. Often what happens for platforms like us is that we are very confused about what our approach should be, because you have one approach in the state and one approach in the center. So when we've communicated multiple times to both state governments and central governments that please talk to each other and have one thing that will make it easier for all platforms, workers, and everyone to work towards and have access to, right? So this has been an ongoing conversation. Everyone are trying their level best to see this to a fruitful completion. We are hoping that there will be some clarity very soon. But what I want to bring attention to is, have they really asked what a gig worker needs? For example, the social security pool is talking about health insurance, life insurance, term insurance. But when you ask a gig worker what they require, they are not really worried about a health insurance which is only given to you when you are hospitalized. What they worry is what will happen when they have a cough or a common cold or something like that, where they will have to pay the doctor fees or a fee amount for the scanning. Their OPD is where their biggest expenses. If you have a common cold or something like that, that will actually topple their monthly budget, right? Is there any insurance that covers for that? Has the government thought about covering OPD for the gig workers? No. When you talk about Ayushman Bharat, again, when you have a vehicle, then you are not eligible for Ayushman Bharat. Ayushman Bharat does not cover OPD. So any social security scheme should be. Yeah. Any social security scheme designed for gig worker should have the end beneficiary, which is the gig worker at the center. It is important that the gig worker has access to the schemes that they're eligible for. Now, it is very easy for the government, any government, to come up with schemes. But where it breaks down at the grassroots level is there is no awareness creation by any government, be it the state or the center, to the end beneficiary that, hey, these are the XYZ schemes that you can have access to. How many citizens, including us, right, know what are the schemes that we are eligible for? Do we know if there is some scheme that we are eligible for, how do we access it when we are in trouble? So the lack of awareness is there at every level, and it will be even worse when you have a gig worker. It will be even worse at a gig worker level, right? So first, I think it is important to understand what a gig worker require and design schemes based on that, and effectively communicate it to the gig workers that if you have these issues, then here is a process for you to access benefits of the scheme, and there has to be some mechanism. So as of now, the central government has designed e-Shram portal, which will solve most of these issues. But again, it's been in conversation for many years. So we are hoping that some logical conclusion will happen very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what gets missed, and we saw this with the ride-hailing regulations when they came out across states. I mean, one, how adversarial they are to the businesses. One is, of course, that states tend to be beholden to very, very narrow incumbent interests. And also the other thing that gets missed is essentially all of you are pan-India businesses. A lot of your work is across borders and things like that. And while on the one hand it could be seen as beneficial where it could force different states to compete for your business is everywhere. So there needs to be an interoperability of regulation, which is something that is understood the world over regarding tech regulation, and that is what a central legislation provides, but unfortunately states don't get the message. I'm going to open it up to the audience for a couple of questions. We have about 5 minutes, so if anyone has any questions.
Thank you. I'll answer your question by stating that when the Ministry of Labour and Employment last year came out with a directive in September that platforms need to integrate the API with eShram, Zomato was one of the first platforms that did it. And this was something that was commended by the Honorable Labour Minister as well. We have been pursuing this very aggressively to get the integration done, to start. And now, as we speak, in fact, today in the morning as well, there was a review meeting for this, where now we have been asked that, the onboarding process should be made quicker for gig workers, and that is something that we are pursuing. And hopefully, within the next 1 or 2 months, we hope to see a good number of people on the platform.
At Porto, we are just starting the integration, so we are in the process. So there isn't any formal decision about how we will have to engage with the gig worker to get them to register. We've just started the process.
Go ahead. Just ask your question.
Okay, so hi, my name is Gaurav. It is about ultimately all these platforms is to enhance the user experience. So it is about from the perspective of a user. Recently, I forgot my laptop charger in the office, and then I requested one of my colleagues to deliver it through one of the platforms, so which is obviously available here. So then the gentleman who was actually delivering it, he denied delivering it at the door, whereas we specifically opted for the option. There were three, as I've been told by my colleague, there were three options to deliver it on the society or the tower where you live or at the door. We specifically chose to deliver at the door and paid extra for it, but then this gentleman denied. Had it been, this is a common trend from Flipkart, Amazon, and I believe that's little logical as well because they carry lots of stuff with them, a big bag, which is not the case with this one-to-one delivery. It's like a pointed delivery from one end to another. But then this gentleman denied. So my humble request, it is not in a form of a question, but a request to please also give them some kind of education as to it is at times maybe necessarily, maybe in case of Meghna, if she requires some document the code, perhaps I don't know where this guy will deliver. In my case, it may also happen related to the medicine of my mother. When I'm somewhere in the office, she may not be able to go down this side to collect medicine. So maybe perhaps if that can also be sort of briefed or educated or guided to the person who is delivering it, it will definitely enhance the user experience.
My question is more around carrying forward from the last panel discussion. There was a question around ensuring a career progression for the gig economy workers, which I think Ayush partially covered what they are doing at Zomato. So first question I have is around that. Like, are these like outliers, like one of a kind career progression opportunities that are being given to some of the star performers from within the gig database? Or like, is there a very systemic plan? Is there a very integrated plan within all of your organizations that takes care of how the gig worker would progress? Let's say 5 years down your organization, 10 years down the organization, how would the delivery person look like? So that's one part of the question. Like, is there a method to the madness? The second part of the question is more around upskilling, reskilling, as well as constant assessment, hiring, all of those things. So I understand like all of you have attract different kinds of gig workers, given that the definition itself is very diluted. So do all of you do your own things when it comes down to upskilling, reskilling, assessment, and so on? Or like, is there some kind of a collective, some kind of a common effort where you come together and the government is also roped in when it comes down to some foundational skills, and on top of that, the different streams which each of you need? So is there any initiative towards that? So I hope like it's a long question, but I hope
So foremost, it's important to understand that gig work is very transient in nature. A person associated with my platform has the freedom to associate with someone else tomorrow, someone else day after, and on the fourth day, they might not even undertake gig work at all. That being said, when we rolled out our program to have product managers from gig workers, there were a lot of responses that came in, and out of those, the best 4 ideas that our folks found they were imparted. I think believe the second batch of this started in October. So every 2 to 3 months, we are taking folks and getting them on board, working with the product folks, and find out some form of good solutions to existing problems. That being said, Blinkit, which is one of our businesses, signed a MOU with the National Skill Development Council last year, wherein we have been working with NSDC to upskilling the folks who are associated with Blinkit dark stores and in the fleet. Similarly, sometime last year, we signed an agreement with the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment on the PM Daksh scheme, where physically disabled delivery partners were upskilled and given a platform, and they were onboarded in large number. It's part of our sustainability vision. At the same time, I don't, as an industry, I feel we should have some form of collaboration on this to collectively work on this front. But then it takes two to clap a hand, and I would be glad if we could have more discourse on this front. Thank you.
I can add. See, if you look at the gig workers, they are primarily an entrepreneur. They choose a particular path, and then in their entrepreneurial journey, they have chosen something, maybe a delivery as a one work, or being part of a mobility platform, being a bike taxi captain, or a three-wheeler captain, or a four-wheeler driver. What we have seen in our journey as well is there are people, when right amount of financial inclusion is offered to them, they would like to empower themselves. So we have seen people moving from being a bike taxi, move to a three-wheeler. They have been given an opportunity. Maybe they start with taking rentals and then owning an asset itself. Similarly, we have seen three-wheeler captain moving to a next stage of having a four-wheeler. Even though our journey, we are the last one to come, where there are Uber or Ola being the incumbents will exist. In our limited journey itself, we have seen this. So definitely that empowerment is happening. The biggest barrier for them is the financial inclusion. And that, if we can work, and that is where we as a platform are working, and especially Rapido is working towards, how can we bring that financial inclusion? How can we better look at them getting the right amount of loans or whatever the financial stability that they need? How do we work towards that? That's exactly what we are focusing on. So the question is, one side, yes, like a skill development that is needed. The other side is what they basically need is, give me funds, I have the ability to empower myself. And that is exactly what we are looking at.
Like, thanks for the suggestion where that food for thought about how platforms should come together to do something. That's something that we will, I think all platforms have been trying to do their bit. So even at Porter, it's like more ad hoc, more compared to how we would want to be, which is more organized and scalable. As of now, it is in a very nascent stage where we are just trying and identifying if there is someone, like if there is a driver partner who we think can actually now become a person in charge of the onboarding center, who will be the face for the other drivers who are coming and joining the platform. Those kind of things are done in a very ad hoc manner as of now at Porter. Nothing organized or scalable, but the thought that all platforms coming together to do something is something that we would also love to do. Thank you.
I think we're gonna close it there. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you. Oh, we did. Sorry.
Very thanks, sir. You are very good work, and new generation के लिए बहुत अच्छा कर रहे हैं आप, and very comfort to life our. So kind of you, and my blessings always with you, healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Thank you for those kind words. Yeah, I think that what we can leave here today with is that gig companies or gig work companies are working pretty hard to ensure worker welfare. And I think what gets lost sight of in this, it's just something we kept hammering home, but I think doesn't penetrate, is that a majority of India's workforce is temporary and contractual. And I think people lose sight of the fact that while benefits, or they call for benefits to be given in this area, those benefits are not extended to a majority of the workforce in other sectors. And I think that needs to be discussed a little more, particularly when you're talking about career progression or anything like that. Are factories in India working towards the progression of their tailors or their daily wages? I don't think so. And while there are social security regulations there, they're very easy to kind of avoid or evade. So I think that this broader context needs to be considered when we have these conversations or when we kind of import discourse around tech policy from different jurisdictions. We'll close it there. Thank you.